An old man, a stolen wallet, and a chance encounter with a Hollywood star. Jack's life is disrupted when Macaulay Culkin becomes involved in a dangerous game he never expected. A mysterious gift, a forgotten past, and dark secrets slowly unravel, leaving Jack questioning everything. Is his past really behind him, or was it always waiting for him to return? The city bustled with the usual energy, a chaotic symphony of honking cars, chatter, and hurried footsteps. Pedestrians moved like waves on a vast ocean, each person lost in their own world, unaware of the lives unfolding around them. On the corner of 7th and Main, tucked away on a worn blanket, Jack sat, his body contorted into a hunched figure. His face was a map of wrinkles, each one telling a story of survival, of moments lost in time. His dirty brown coat barely covered his thin frame, and his unkempt hair matched the streets he called home. His eyes, however, gleamed with something that hadn't been washed away by time: hope. He had learned to survive in this city, to read its people, its rhythms, its moods. Today was no different. As the crowd surged around him, Jack noticed a familiar face: Macaulay Culkin, walking briskly, his head down, hands gripping his coat against the chill. There was something in his posture, something tense. Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that look before: stress, frustration, maybe even fear. The chaos of the city swallowed the celebrity up, but Jack didn't need to follow the crowd to know something was wrong. In one swift motion, a figure from behind grabbed at Culkin's pocket. Jack's keen eyes caught it immediately, a wallet snatched right out of the actor's hand. The thief moved like a shadow, disappearing into the crowd before Culkin even realized his loss. Without hesitation, Jack rose. His body was frail, but his movements were precise. He'd had years of practice, observing, reacting. Slowly, he followed the thief, weaving through the bustling street, his pace steady but unhurried. As he rounded a corner, he spotted the thief ducking into an alley, wallet clutched tightly in his hand. Jack, never breaking stride, kept his distance. The alley was dark, and the thief was too preoccupied with his spoils to notice the old man slipping up behind him. With a quick jolt, Jack grabbed the thief's shoulder, spinning him around. The thief froze for a second, eyes wide with shock. Jack's grip on his wrist tightened, and without saying a word, he yanked the wallet from the thief's grasp. Without hesitation, Jack turned and began walking back toward the street. As Jack stepped back into the bustling crowd, he saw Culkin still standing there, dazed and unaware. He approached the actor, who was now scanning the crowd, clearly upset. Jack held out the wallet, the leather worn but still intact. "Mister, I believe you dropped this," Jack said, his voice steady, a contrast to the hectic energy around them. Culkin turned, surprise flooding his face. His brow furrowed as he took the wallet from Jack's outstretched hand. For a moment, there was silence between them, just the hum of the city in the background. Jack didn't look for thanks, didn't expect it, but Culkin's eyes softened. "Thank you," Culkin said, his voice tinged with gratitude. His eyes lingered on Jack, seeing him in a way that most people did not. "I didn't even see him. You're a good man." Jack shook his head slowly. "Good? Maybe. But good men don't always get what they deserve." Culkin didn't know how to respond. A moment of awkward silence passed between them. It was clear that Jack wasn't looking for pity, but his words still carried weight. I owe you something. Can I buy you something?" "A meal?" Culkin asked, his voice sincere, though the offer seemed almost mechanical. A reflex, something he'd been taught to do in moments like this. Jack paused. His eyes flickered briefly, not to the meal, but to the actor himself. "No, thank you," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't need anything. Just the kindness of a stranger, that's enough for me." Culkin hesitated for a moment, clearly moved by Jack's words, but then nodded. There was something about this old man that struck a chord in him, something deep that he couldn't explain. "All right," Culkin said, stepping back. But you've got a heart of gold, I'll give you that. Jack smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he turned to leave. He muttered to himself, almost too quietly for anyone to hear. I've seen too many things, too much to count. No one's heart stays pure forever. And with that, Jack disappeared into the crowd, leaving Culkin standing there, holding his wallet, feeling a strange pull in his chest. He glanced around, but the old man was gone, swallowed up by the sea of people, as if he had never been there at all. Culkin's thoughts lingered on Jack's words, a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. What had Jack meant, and what had he seen in this world that had left him so bitter, yet somehow still hopeful? The mystery of that brief encounter gnawed at him, as if there was something Jack wasn't telling him, something that would change everything. The city hummed around him, but for Culkin, the noise seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered now was the strange, fleeting moment with the old man, and the feeling that something important had just been set into motion. The next morning, Jack woke up to a chill in the air that bit into his skin as he slowly opened his eyes. He wasn't surprised by the harsh light of the street lamp still flickering above him. He had spent too many nights in the shadows to be bothered by its weak glow. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw something new in front of him. A small, neatly wrapped package, placed carefully on the ground next to his ragged sleeping bag. There was no one around. The bustling city that never stopped seemed to move faster than ever, oblivious to the man lying on the ground, except for this mysterious package. He stared at it for a moment, his instincts warning him to stay away. But curiosity gnawed at him, something he hadn't felt in years. Slowly he reached out, tearing the paper with a shaky hand. As he pulled the wrapping away, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a watch, a beautifully crafted piece with a face he immediately recognized. It was an old, tarnished thing, with a gleaming silver band and a golden face that reflected the morning light like a piece of distant memory. Jack didn't need to know much about luxury to understand the value of this thing. The note attached to the watch was simple, just a few words scrawled in a familiar handwriting. A token of appreciation. It should never have been lost. The words felt heavy, like an old curse. A chill ran down Jack's spine as he held the watch in his hands. It was impossible. The watch it belonged to someone famous, someone he had known years ago. Someone who had disappeared without a trace. Someone whose life had been intertwined with his own, in ways Jack had tried to forget. It was a connection he didn't want to acknowledge. The more he stared at it, the more the memory of the past rushed back to him, stirring up old, painful emotions. How did Macaulay Culkin know about this? Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, a low murmur cutting through his thoughts. "Don't touch that." Jack whipped his head around, his heart racing. A stranger stood at the alley's entrance, his face half hidden under the hood of a faded jacket. The man's eyes glinted with an unsettling intensity, as if he already knew Jack's every move. I didn't mean," Jack started, but the man raised a hand, silencing him. "It's dangerous," the stranger said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That watch is a thing of the past, a past you don't want to bring back." Jack felt the weight of the words, his grip on the watch tightening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice betraying more fear than he wanted to admit. The stranger stepped closer, his shadow falling over Jack like a dark cloud. "You don't know what you've gotten into," he said, his eyes flickering nervously. Then, before Jack could speak, the man was gone, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared, leaving only the lingering taste of unease in the air. Jack stood frozen for a long moment, the watch still clutched tightly in his hands. The stranger's warning echoed in his mind, a warning that felt far too familiar. This wasn't just about a celebrity's lost property or a moment of kindness. No, it was something much deeper. Jack felt it in the pit of his stomach. Something dark was unfolding, and he was tangled in its web. He looked down at the watch again, his hands trembling as he turned it over. There was no going back now. Jack's mind raced as he left the alleyway, clutching the watch like a lifeline. He needed answers, answers that only the watch could provide. But the mysterious warning still echoed in his ears, and the shadow of the stranger's cold gaze followed him like a ghost. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a lost item. More to Culkin's involvement, more to his own past. He needed to dig deeper. The library was a quiet refuge from the chaos of the streets, the shelves stacked high with forgotten knowledge and dusty memories. Jack had spent countless hours in places like this before, but today it felt different. The air smelled of old books and secrets. With shaky hands, he sat at one of the long wooden tables, the watch before him like a ticking bomb waiting to explode. He started by tracing the engraved markings on the back, looking for anything that could point to its origins. Hours passed in a blur of research, but it wasn't until he unearthed an old newspaper clipping that the truth started to unravel. The watch had belonged to a man named Vince Calderone, a notorious criminal whose name had been whispered in the darkest corners of the city. Calderone was infamous for orchestrating a series of high-profile heists across the globe, all connected to a shadowy criminal syndicate known as the Syndicate. The more Jack read, the more his stomach churned. The Syndicate was rumored to have ties to everything: politicians, corporations, underground operations. It was the kind of organization that controlled lives from the shadows. The watch, it seemed, was more than just a symbol of Calderone's wealth. It was an item of power, a memento of his reign in the criminal underworld. Jack's heart pounded. Why had Culkin given it to him? As he pieced together the disturbing history of the watch, a chill ran down his spine. The deeper he delved, the more he found Culkin's name tied to strange, unexplainable connections. Could it be that Culkin knew more about Jack's past than he had let on? Was he involved in this conspiracy, or was he just another pawn swept up in the chaos? Jack closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing his temples. He didn't know who he could trust anymore. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't ignore the pull of this past, no matter how painful or dangerous it was. It was as if the watch had awakened something deep within him, a memory buried so far beneath the surface that he'd almost forgotten it existed. Just as the pieces started to fall into place, the doors of the library opened, and a cold draft swept across the room. Jack didn't look up at first, but something about the air shifted. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He knew someone was watching him. He glanced over his shoulder and his blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway was a face he never expected to see again, a face he had tried to forget. "Jack," the man said, his voice low and filled with venom. "We need to talk." The man was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, his dark eyes gleaming with a mix of contempt and familiarity. Jack froze, recognizing him instantly. This was Damien, an old associate from his past. A man involved in the very heist that Jack had tried to bury deep in his memory. A heist involving Vince Calderone, the very man who once owned the watch. Damien stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Jack. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You were the key player in the heist that brought Calderone to power. You don't get to walk away from that. And now, look where we are. Look what you've unleashed." Jack's head spun. A heist? Him? He was involved in this? I don't remember," Jack stammered, confusion and fear settling deep in his chest. The memories were like shards of glass, scattered and jagged, too painful to piece together. Damien's smile was cold. "Oh, I think you do. You just don't want to." As Jack's mind struggled to process this revelation, Damien took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You really think Culkin's just a good Samaritan? No, Jack. He's tied to the Syndicate, just like you were. And now they know you have the watch. They'll be coming for you, for both of you." Jack's world spun. The watch, Culkin, his forgotten past, It was all coming together in a horrifying way. What had he done? What had Culkin gotten himself into by giving him the watch? "Time's running out," Damien added, his voice now a whisper, filled with malice. "And if you don't want to be the next one to vanish, you'll start remembering fast." The library seemed to close in around Jack, the walls pressing in as the weight of his past crashed into him. How much of this was his fault? How much of this was something he could escape? The clock was ticking, and Jack could feel it. The weight of Damien's words pressed down on Jack as he tried to make sense of the situation. His mind raced, spinning in circles. Culkin, a member of the syndicate, Jack could hardly believe it. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The watch, the cryptic warning, the strange sense of familiarity. Everything was connected in ways Jack couldn't yet fully understand. And now, with Damien's appearance, it seemed the pieces were finally falling into place. Jack didn't have much time to dwell on it. As he left the library in a daze, he knew that the storm was coming. The syndicate, Culkin's betrayal, and his own dark past were all coming for him. He had to confront it. He had to know the truth. That's when he saw Culkin again, standing just outside the alleyway where Jack had first encountered him. His eyes were cold, calculating, nothing like the man who had handed over the watch in what seemed like a simple act of kindness. Jack approached cautiously, his hand instinctively brushing the watch hidden in his coat pocket. "Jack, we need to talk," Culkin said, his voice low and urgent. Jack didn't speak at first. Instead, he simply stared at him, the weight of the betrayal hanging between them. "You're with them, aren't you?" Jack asked quietly, a mix of anger and confusion rising in his chest. Culkin hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I never wanted you to get caught up in this, but it was always part of the plan. The watch. It was never just a gift. It was meant to pull you back into the fold. We've been watching you for years." The words hit Jack like a ton of bricks. Watching him, his past, his life, everything he thought he knew was now a lie. He had been a pawn in someone else's game all along. "I'm sorry, Jack," Culkin continued, his voice tinged with regret, but there was no turning back. "You were the key to everything, the final piece. The syndicate needed you to remember, to bring out the old you, the one that was part of their world." Jack's head spun. He had no idea what Culkin was talking about. The man he had known as a friendly figure, someone who had helped him, was a puppet master in a deadly game. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold in his mind. The final confrontation came without warning. As the two of them tried to flee the area, a group of men appeared, stepping from the shadows with cold, menacing expressions. The syndicate was here, and they weren't going to let anyone walk away. Jack and Culkin fought side by side, but the odds were stacked against them. With the watch as their only weapon, Jack knew he had to act fast. He wasn't sure how, but somehow, the watch seemed to pulse with energy, as if it held some hidden power that was now awakening inside him. But just as they thought they had outsmarted their pursuers, Culkin turned on Jack. The betrayal was swift, and Jack barely had time to react. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Culkin had been working for the syndicate all along. The entire ordeal, Culkin's kindness, the gift of the watch, the danger that had followed him, was all part of a twisted plan to manipulate Jack into rediscovering his own dark past. "I'm sorry, Jack," Culkin said again, this time with finality in his voice. "This was never about saving you. It was about getting you to remember who you really are." Jack's heart shattered as Culkin's words sunk in. A player in a game he never agreed to. The old man had been a part of something bigger than he could have ever imagined. And now, that truth was his burden to bear. The syndicate's grip was tightening, but Jack was no longer just a victim. He was no longer the man who had forgotten everything. With the watch in his hand, he confronted the truth of his past. The man he once was The criminal mastermind, the architect of a heist that had changed the course of his life, wasn't gone. He had been hiding, buried beneath years of guilt and regret. As the dust settled, Jack's life was forever altered. He had discovered the truth, but it came at a cost. He had lost everything. His trust in Culkin, his peace of mind, and the man he thought he was. But the story didn't end there. Jack stood alone in the alley, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. Was it all a coincidence? Or had he always been meant to be part of this dark world, bound by the choices of his past? The questions lingered, unanswered, as Jack stared at the watch, his link to a past he could never escape. The final image was one of a man at a crossroads, the truth in his hands, but still uncertain of the path ahead. Would he reclaim his life, or be swallowed by the shadows of his past? Only time would tell.